So we are now recording. We are not going to be allowed, for those of you familiar with Zoom, we're not going to be doing any screen sharing. So don't bother trying to do it. By all means, use the chat to put stuff in, whether it's private messages to other people you recognize or links to things that have been mentioned or that you want to make people aware of. Again, we can, well, you can, and we can record the chat at the end so that we know what was in it. Later on, the format for tonight is going to be that after I've shut up in a few minutes, Laura Swaffield, the chair of the Library Campaign, is going to say something. Then we have 3 guest speakers, although I think that only 2 of them have arrived so far, unless one of them is masquerading under a pseudonym. And then we're going to throw it open to general discussion, and that's when you get your chance to make comments, ask questions, etc. We are asked, in order to allow people, the maximum number of people, the maximum amount of time to get into the discussion, we are asking that people restrict their contributions to 2 minutes. If everybody seems to have said everything they want in 2 minutes and we finish at 8:30, then we'll obviously allow people a bit, another chance. But we do really want to allow maximum participation. So I think that's all the housekeeping. I just want to say a very quick thing, give you a quick background to what the Library Campaign is and what we have been up to. Library Campaign, for those that don't know, started in 1984 at a conference in Sheffield, arising out of which some people said, we can't just have a conference and talk about what terrible things are going on in libraries. And this was in the era of the Thatcher government's cuts in local authorities, which pale into insignificance compared to these days. But that was the conference and the setup for the Library Campaign. We continued in that vein until 2004, so 20 years later, when we formally became a registered charity, only covering England and Wales. I believe there may be at least one person here from Scotland. You're welcome to participate and all the rest of it, but technically the Library Campaign doesn't cover Scotland. So what we have been doing over all that time, could take far too long to go into in detail, but what we try to do is give advice to friends and user groups and campaign groups, usually when they have been faced with cuts or closures or threats of what they perceive as threats to their library service, or indeed sometimes if they just want to try and get improvements. We issue press releases. We always have. We've had press coverage of various shapes and sizes over the years, including one dedicated TV program many years ago. We try to liaise with other library and trade organisations. I'll talk about them in a bit more detail later. We've given evidence to government both and to politicians in terms of written submissions to consultations of one sort or another, but also to parliamentary committees, standing committees, the DCMS or whatever their predecessors were. We don't pretend to be legal experts, but people quite often come to us and say, they can't do that, surely it's illegal, or words to that effect. And we do try and give advice based on our experience and knowledge. And one of our trustees who is in this meeting is a lawyer who has been very helpful in that respect and may make an intervention later. We publish a magazine a couple of times a year. If you join the Library Campaign, £15 for individuals, £20 for campaign groups, you'll get a couple of copies of each edition, but it's also on our website. And we have over the years organised conferences either on our own as the library campaign, or in the middle of the 20-teens, 3 or 4 conferences with a coalition of groups called Speak Up for Libraries, which included Unison, CILIP, the Professional Association, Alan Gibbons' campaign for the book, the WI at one point, and I've probably forgotten a couple, and and individual campaigners as well. So they gave us a chance to talk to, as somebody put it, the great and the good, with mixed success, I would say. I don't think we moved any mountains, but it did give people a chance to network and to exchange views and to make contacts. Currently, or certainly over the lockdown, the website has been the focus of our work. The logo that you can see behind me, and also on the TLC admin picture, which is actually me in another guise, is our new logo, which came with that website. It was launched in the autumn of last year. We are really, well, 2 things. One is we're pleased to have had support from Digital Content Associates, DCA, and Barney Allen is on the call from DCA. And we are very pleased that the website appears to be a success, partly due to an exercise we're doing with Google Ads, again supported and assisted by an American organization called Koios. And Peter from Koios is on the call as well somewhere, or was, there he is, waving. So the website, as I say, it's been going for about 6 months. We would really welcome your comments. We have made some changes in the already, and we have one more set lined up, although we're trying to work out how to do it. But any other comments you've got, you can send to us after the meeting. There is a link on there to Public Library News, and Ian Anstis, I think, was going to be on this call, but I can't see him. But he is the editor of Public Libraries News, and if you haven't come across that site, you really should look for it or get to it through our site, because he does a sterling job in just literally posting what is new in public libraries in the UK and indeed abroad. The thing that we are also looking at doing is with an organisation, well, a group of people under the name of Libraries Hacked, who have done some incredible work with library statistics and data. They also have Library TV, which is effectively a collation of every video they can find that's been created and made public by public libraries in the UK. What we're hoping to do is include that on our site as well. So by all means, tell us what we're missing, what could be better, what you don't like, and all the rest of it. Finally, I think from me, I mentioned that we do try and participate, or to join up and work with other organisations in the library world. Working with the government department is not easy, but we do try and engage with them from time to time. Last time I think we engaged in any physical way was with Ed Vasey, if anybody remembers that far back. The Arts Council for England, and we did meet them last year before lockdown. Libraries Connected, which is what the Society of Chief Librarians became. CILIP and their Libraries Deliver offshoot, and various other organisations that are around. We do not, many of them are getting better and are being a bit more active and vocal, but we don't claim that they're perfect by any stretch, and we'll support them when they do something good, but there's a long way to go with that. And more to the point, we need to be doing stuff as the library campaign, and Laura will talk a bit more about that, I think. But one of the reasons for having this meeting, or perhaps the main reason, is to find out from library groups, library friends, library activists, what it is you think we could be doing or should be doing, and how we might work with you and your colleagues and others like all of us. That is enough from me. I've slightly overrun the time limit I had, so I'll pass quickly to Laura. You can unmute. There you go.
I have unmuted. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We've got people here from the USA, Japan, and all over the country. Lancaster, Warrington, Northamptonshire, Kent, Suffolk, London, Barnet, Devon, Cornwall, Swindon, Dorset, Isle of Wight, Bristol, Somerset, Cheshire, and Fife in Scotland. So that's a wonderful cover. And every kind of friends group too. Something I think we need to get out of the way is that some people think there are different types of friends group. There are groups working with library services that are not in crisis, basically trying to get them better used. There are campaign groups working to protect services that are in crisis, with or without the active help of the actual library service. And there are groups that campaign hard to save their libraries, but finally get pushed into actually running them, with all sorts of different arrangements. But most or all, I think, would much prefer to revert to being council run. So we would argue they are really all the same, just in different phases. There's more to gain by sharing than there is by trying to put one kind of group against another kind of group. So what is still only too common is that users and friends are not listened to or consulted, or not before the final stage. You know, this is what we've decided to do, what do you think? This applies both to local councils and to those national library organisations we try to work with. We want to change that. What other business pays so little attention to the views of its consumers? I would like to know. And there is so much good stuff out there. We're always impressed by the brilliance of what friends do. Whatever stage they're at, they come up with ideas for events, publicity, contacts, ideas for improving the service, ways to support the staff, ideas for savings, information, tips, artwork, slogans, arguments. It all tends to stay at local level and not get shared, and that's the pity. Also shared, we find, are common issues between library services and often with other entities within the borough, like dodgy consultations. We're doing a file of those. Like local democracy, which is really not in a good state. Like the uselessness of the DCMS in its current form. So that's what's out there. As for the library campaign, we've got a steady number of memberships who we value enormously, but we could make use of more, I think. People are always very grateful for our help and our information, and they don't tend to actually join. So we end up as a small group of people who work for free. We're in a sort of steady state. We can do what we do, but we can't do more. And we would like to do more. So we've got some ideas, but we want to know yours. I could go on about our ideas, but maybe another time. I think that's probably my 5 minutes. We've got some speakers here. For some reason, we've just chosen people who are in active campaigning mode. I don't quite know why we did that now, but they're people we know and respect. So I think we were going to have Elizabeth first from Save Croydon Libraries. She'll tell you more what they're up to at the moment and what lessons they have to pass on, perhaps.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Can everyone hear me? Brilliant. Okay. Save Croydon Libraries campaign has been in existence since 2011, when campaigners from a number of libraries joined together to create a united borough-wide campaign. Cuts have been made to staffing, the stock, opening hours, and through co-location and outsourcing of the service. Although they've been brought back in-house following the collapse of Carillion, all the cuts have driven down use, and this is now being used to help justify further cuts as Croydon Council try to make savings across the board to dig themselves out of a huge financial hole they found themselves in. The message of the campaign is very, very clear and is basically unchanged. We're campaigning for properly funded, staffed and stocked public libraries. We're partway through the consultation stage at the moment, and this is one of the most flawed processes I've seen. There are errors and omissions in the statistics, differences between the online and paper versions with differing levels of information provided in each, poor promotion of the consultation, particularly during a pandemic, means the first phase was shut and people didn't even know that it was going on. People have had difficulty accessing both the paper copies and the online consultation. And the council has actually encouraged people to fill the consultation in multiple times, which must surely skew the results. So what have we done and what have we learnt? We received early advice from the legal firm, Watkins and Gunn, who has acted in a number of library cases, including the judicial review for Northamptonshire. And this was invaluable in providing the legal perspective in case we need to go down that route. They said it's vital to start your planning early. We've produced some resources for children to get them involved in campaigning for our libraries, which might be of interest to others. And this was put in place because we couldn't get out and campaign physically. Having info and contacts passed on by the library campaign as they arose has also been really invaluable. And I think Laura in particular does not get the credit due for all her hard work on this. Data to make the case for public libraries, to back up arguments and to check and unpick the skewed view often presented by councils is really important. But in our case, we had to push for the full libraries data in the latest consultation on closures. You can never have too many volunteers. The skills they bring are less important. Whilst it's been really very, very helpful to have people with the skills and willingness to produce artwork and social media images, or to help refine key messages in our recent campaign, it has been just as important to have people to help who can spread the word, keep an ear to the ground for useful information, or take on one-off tasks. One of the things I think would be really probably quite useful to have is a general do's and don't list, which we haven't got round to producing, to help people new to campaigning, as people do surprising things and often well-meaning things without thinking through the consequences. A model constitution for campaign group, there's lots of model constitution for friends groups, but not so much for campaign groups, would have been useful, although I appreciate that groups have gone right through to judicial review without any formal structure. I absolutely believe that campaigners need to work together on a national level. We can learn from and support each other, and many already do, particularly on social media or through networking. We should also be working with the unions and the professional body, who can add their support for public library services, as well as the speaking out for the profession and library workers. Sadly, in the case of Croydon, we have been let down a bit in this respect recently, but this is perhaps due to the absolute magnitude of the cuts across the board in Croydon that the unions are fighting. We've been lucky, though, to have National Library campaigner and union activist Alan Wiley and other union activists from outside of Croydon attending meetings and speaking up for library workers and to give the library workers' view. Just look at the work of Unite in Bromley and Unison in Lambeth and all they have achieved by working hand in hand with campaigners and the general public. My final points are politicians are often are not too keen on campaigners bringing the truth to light. So it may be wise to develop a thick skin and not take things that may be said personally. Unity, and I cannot stress this enough, is absolutely key to effectively fighting cuts. Local politicians just love to divide and rule, playing one group off against the other. It's very important to keep the campaign message clear and focused, so people know what the campaign's about. And do bear in mind that sadly not all campaigners, campaigns or friends groups actually have properly funded, staffed and stocked public libraries as their core message or motivation. it's very easy to promote a general but pretty empty message of saving libraries without specifying what this means. It's ineffective. It can lead people into signing up to a campaign only to find out that their interpretation of what saving libraries means is vastly different to that of the campaign. And it could actually damage the wider campaign itself if the key messages do not align. Thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great. Liz Miles, I think, is here. She's from Souls, Save Our Libraries Essex, which is a different campaign at a different stage, but very much looking forward to see what she's got to say.
You need to unmute, Liz.
Okay. Hi there. Seoul managed to get Essex County Council to do a U-turn on closing a third of their libraries, but now they've got a strategy in place to turn most of the libraries into so-called community-run libraries, which we see as a kind of closure by stealth, backdoor closure, etc. Seoul was quite successful, so I think we picked up a lot of good ideas through that clearly proved to be effective. But first of all, what extra resources, information would have helped us? There is information we struggled to find, like what sort of library systems operate in different areas and where new systems like swipe card entry instead of staff are used, and the data on the effects. Also, it wasn't easy to find out who runs the libraries in each area, whether it's a trust, volunteers, council, and so on. Of course, the actual financial value of libraries is enormous, but it's really hard to break down and find figures. So I think a national online resource where campaigners can add information like that would be really great. And also, we'd always be hoping for extra help with promotion of our campaign plans, and adding to the number of our activists in some parts of Essex, and obviously help with printing leaflets, etc. is good. But some of the things that we found really successful during the sort of height of our campaign and continue to use these things, I'll whiz through them. Major celebrity endorsements had a huge impact and got national press coverage like David Walliams, etc. Young campaigners have really caught the media attention as well. For example, videos, our young campaigner Josephine got Michael Rosen's support and achieved huge numbers of shares and likes on Twitter. We have a big presence on Facebook and Twitter. We always tag BBC Essex or other journalists on Twitter if it's relevant. We have regular press releases, and local papers are always keen for something to fill their pages, and they often just put word for word what we've written. Personal letters to the press as well. Local campaign activities, very important, but also we've got them well linked. So quite quickly, every group can quickly get together for bigger marches. Local street stalls with petitions and leafleting. Petitions, we achieved 60,000 signatures just on the first time around. Online petitions through sites like 38 Degrees are very good because signers can be emailed via 38 Degrees about events and actions. Local public Q&A meetings are very effective. A public meeting in the Colchester area certainly put a councillor on the spot. That was good. Marches, including high caliber speakers, music, well-made banners, really led to front page coverage, press coverage, often like double pages in the local press, etc. We put together a document of facts on why so-called community libraries are a bad idea and distributed that document. And in fact, it persuaded groups to withdraw their offers to take over libraries. So that was very, very efficient. We got a world-renowned consultation expert to look at the so-called public consultation that Essex County Council put out. And he gave a damning report, which, although Essex County Council just completely ignored it, it gave us a lot of kudos. I think having clear campaign principles and an agreement on what we wanted to achieve was really important. Also having a clear idea on what a public library is, for example, that they shouldn't be volunteer or community run. And regarding general sort of campaigning approach, there are obviously different views on what's most affected, whether it's campaigners trying to educate and persuade, or to quote Andy, one of our campaigners, he says, for want of a better term, it's about moral shaming, making as much noise as possible and embarrassing the council to change its mind. Scope for groups to work together, absolutely. I really feel so frustrated that library campaigners are not listened to. It's just like we're labelled as activists, but we have an incredible amount of knowledge, and it's really annoying that people like Silip just completely ignore us, or seem to. So I think to raise national awareness, which is certainly what Sol wants to do, we were thinking of having our own national conference. Also, maybe have a date in the year when all campaigns around the country go on a march in their own regions. And also a central reference resource, I think would be great, which could include things like contacts from other campaigns we can call on. That would be really cool. Updates on what different campaigns are doing. Facts about, for example, failing community libraries, SIPFA data and book borrowed numbers, how many children since the lockdown are going back to hardback copy books. Links between libraries and councils' own health and well-being strategies is something interesting to pursue across the country, and problems with too much screen time. Also, I think a how-to sort of information list would be good. For example, how to write a good freedom of information request. Other points we should consider, post-pandemic, this is my own sort of personal idea, was we should maybe do a massive open letter ourselves, pointing out how, you know, a lot of the local governments are going to be looking at health and well-being strategies, while so much of health and well-being and equality is linked to libraries. So there's a really good opportunity there. And finally, a library user said to me yesterday, I'm an old-fashioned girl. I prefer printed books. And I think it's absolutely tragic that people think that they're old-fashioned because they want a printed library book. We have to challenge this inaccurate belief, which is actually promoted by tech companies and councils and partnerships, that printed books are somehow old-fashioned. If we don't, library bookshelves will continue to be pushed away to make space for non-library services like cafes and cash-making companies. Again, I think an open letter on this would be good. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Liz. That is quite some shopping list, isn't it? Which is what we want, absolutely. Now, I don't think our third speaker is there unless he's disguised as a rabbit or something. Glyn? No. All right. Well, that's all the more chance for the rest of us to talk. I thought somebody wrote in and said, activities and campaigns are obviously critical, but we should also be thinking about the long game. Even if a library doesn't seem to be particularly under threat at the moment, we all know that can change overnight. So what should we be doing now to make it harder for councils to make those wrong decisions? I think that is the point that brings us all together, whatever kind of group we happen to be in. It's playing the long game, it's making the contacts, it's making the library's case at national level and at local level, and with the library organisations who, as Liz said, still don't get it. So I think we could make more room in the library campaign website for people to put stuff in and use it more as a notice board. I think we might generally campaign for service users to be listened to. We could perhaps collect together information on particular topics that we think are not being aired enough, as Liz, I think, indicated. And publicity for libraries in general being a good thing. These are the kind of ideas we've been thinking about, but we'd very much like to know what you've been thinking about. It's all about how can we help each other and how can the library campaign help everybody. So I hope somebody will now look at the bottom of their screen and put their hand up or wave and hope and see if we can spot them. We are throwing it open now because we've lost a speaker. Anybody out there? Oh.
I'm ready with 2 ideas.
Fine.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everybody, particularly the Library Campaign, for running this. Laura and I go back a long way to Fry and Barnet Library, which was closed by the council in 2012. I won't go into that, but I wrote a book about it. I've got 2 ideas. It's ideas you're after. I think the DCMS is crucial to this. We all agree that they are totally negative. They are far too unwieldy because they're running sport, they're trying to run culture, theatres. So libraries just get forgotten. So I've got one idea on the DCMS, and I've got another idea on using what contacts we have got. So the DCMS, if we had somebody like Jenny Lee was in 1945 as culture minister, then things like the 1964 Act would have been implemented by now, because she was an enthusiast for all things to do with culture, whereas Oliver Dowden is, sorry, the less said the better. So we all get blanket replies from quite a large staff at the DCMS saying, thank you for your ideas, but we're not interested. Well, this has got to change. If we want the 1964 Act to be implemented, which I think we did, because 2 things really, more than 2 things. Unstaffed libraries are not libraries. I know I'm speaking to the converted. And homes without the internet are children without access to education. Now, the DCMS can change all that by implementing the 64 Act. It's perfectly clear what the intentions of the Act were, and it needs a culture minister on our side, somebody like John, sorry, where are we? Like John Bird, Lord John Bird. He put up for Mayor of London. He was going to put up for Mayor of London. He describes himself as a working class Tory, so he'd probably get in as culture minister. And so the other thing about the DCMS is to divide it down so that Oliver Dowden, who loves having consultations and with Sky Television about televising matches from empty stadiums, he can do sport, have Lord Birch to do libraries, have somebody who knows culture and theatre to do culture and theatre. So the DCMS needs both to be broken down into these things. That's one idea. And the other idea, if I've only got 2 minutes, is this one to use our known contacts. Now, in The Guardian yesterday, there was a good article by, let's find it, Sean Kane, about school libraries. Children's laureates unite to urge Prime Minister to breathe new life into school libraries. So people like Michael Rosen, people like Mallory Blackman had written to Boris Johnson, urging the case for that. So we have contacts, tremendous contacts. We need to use them. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keith. It would be a wonderful day if we ever get to choose the minister, but I think we're away from being able to do that. Who else has got an idea, maybe at a more modest level of activity?
Isadore has offered to say a couple of things.
Oh, excellent.
Hi everyone, I'm Isadore. I work with a group called Book 28 Library. So we look at the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and other LGBT library users. Particularly the effects of Section 28 has had on library service. And in our experience, the only kind of library service that is capable of delivering the broad amount of nuanced policies and services that is needed by those groups are fully funded and fully staffed. And we do find that cuts and closures often disproportionately affect LGBT people because that's often seen as a niche collection area that is dropped in favor of bestsellers. I guess I have one suggestion and one question. So one suggestion is we work with a lot of younger people, sort of people anywhere from sort of 18 to 25 often come to our meetings, and they are often actually enthusiastic library users, but I find they tend to know less about library cuts and closures. They typically will know a lot less about how things like the local authorities work. They don't have that long-term experience of campaigning or working in local government, but they are very motivated. They're often very keen to protest for issues that are important to them. So I guess my suggestion would be making sure you're engaging that group. I think the reading agency also mentioned that adults 25 to 44, which is a slightly odd age division, are the most frequent users of public libraries. Particularly with that group, I found that they do not initially understand why community-led libraries might be an issue, but it's been very easy to explain the problems there to them. So I guess as was mentioned about using youth ambassadors and things like that, I think that's a great resource, especially when things are explained to them, or even I think some of the problem is they don't know how libraries have been in the past or could be, because they've just been brought up in the world of austerity and cuts and closures. So don't necessarily know they have the right to ask for more. My question is about legal cases. I believe, was it Barnet Libraries who did try to take it to a judge that the changes to their service meant it no longer constituted an efficient and comprehensive library service, and that was kind of thrown out. And my question is, do we know if anyone's ever made really any successful legal challenges? And do we think that's a worthwhile road to go down of trying to put the weight behind a particular court case, or do you think that will just get thrown out or is kind of an exhausted route, is basically my question.
Okay, that's a very good question. There's a long history of attempts. What Barnet did was to go to the DCMS, which governs libraries and has quite draconian powers, in fact, to intervene if they're not providing a decent service. But over the years, I think it's been the universal experience that they ask for lots of evidence, you give them lots of evidence, months and months and months go past, whatever you've been complaining about actually happens. And then afterwards, the DCMS says it's not minded to intervene. There have been successes when people have taken them to. The next step is, if you can face it, is judicial review, which is taking a court case, very risky, very scary, to persuade the judge that the local authority has not followed proper procedure in making its plans. You can't complain that a plan is stupid, but you can complain that, for instance, the consultation wasn't according to the accepted rules. I'm just wondering, there have been successes on that range of things, most recently in Northamptonshire. I don't know if there's anyone from Northamptonshire here who would like to talk about that. Otherwise, I will.
Well, Callie's got her hand up.
Well, I'm from Northamptonshire, but you possibly can talk with more authority about it than I. But I know that it happened, and I know it was successful, and I was part of the campaign to get it through and push it through. But by all means, you say. I'm sure you've got more information than me.
Well, thank you. In short, Northamptonshire was the first council to get into really deep, serious trouble. Croydon's done it now, but Northamptonshire was the first and glorious example. All sorts of hooing and hawing. They wanted to close libraries. They wanted to change them into volunteer libraries. Then in a sudden panic, they suddenly announced they were going to close a whole bunch of libraries. It's at that point the judicial review was taken, and basically the finding was that it wasn't disagreeing that the council didn't have the money to run those libraries anymore, but what the judge said was that it hadn't followed due process. It had just made a panic-ridden decision to close those libraries without even thinking about whether that would affect their ability to deliver a comprehensive and efficient service according to the 1964 Act, which is what the DCMS is supposed to work to. So they stopped the closure of a heck of a lot of libraries, and that was brilliant. Unfortunately, many might say what the council has come up with instead, a bit like Essex, is instead we'll turn over a great many of those libraries to volunteers to run. So yes, I mean, a big success, and there's a lot of libraries there which would have been closed in using a fairly obscure legal argument, which is all you can do with judicial review. But other things have succeeded. Lancaster, for instance, a few years ago now, managed to avoid library closures by taking a judicial review. I'm just wondering if Geof would like to say something. He's the chap who gives us very useful legal advice.
Geof, you'll need to find the unmute button.
Right at the end, the extreme left at the bottom.
Or just hold your space bar down and talk.
Does this work? Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Well done.
Yeah. Right. Just going back on 2 points there. Yeah. Judicial review to determine if the service is still compliant. Almost never any good. Can be quite simple. The Act provides a remedy, and it isn't in the courts. It's modelled on the planning system. You cannot generally use judicial review to challenge a planning decision unless procedure is wrong. It's very similar. The DCMS should be doing its job. Is it? Well, no. But I doubt we've got yet the evidence to mount a judicial review against the DCMS, but I suspect that with the volume of closures that might be in the offing, we might be able to show a pattern of disregard for the proper exercise of their functions. However, that's a bit in the future. Judicial review against the councils, which is usually based on failure in the consultation process. Yes, good, sometimes it works. But remember, the council can always come up with other problems, other solutions, and they may not be any better. This time they just do the job properly, get the procedures right, and you're a bit stuck there. But I don't say don't bring judicial review, but don't hang too many hopes on it for the long term. The vulnerability is, yes, it strikes at procedure, and they can always do it again and get the procedure right. What else are there? There have been 2 cases where the Department of Horticulture have one case intervened, that was Wirral, and one case where they said they were going to intervene, which was Lancashire. Now I know about Lancashire because I put in a heck of a load of work on it to provide alternatives. Now, Wirral, remember, focused very heavily on deprivation. It's always an idea. Go back to the Wirral inquiry, look at the report, and see whether you can nail them on deprivation. Second one, Lancashire. A lot of work was put in to provide alternatives. Now, it's a bit out of date that now. I've got the form that was prepared, but it's a bit out of date. But nevertheless, the then minister, the junior minister, who lost his seat in the 2017 election, nevertheless was somewhat sympathetic. I think it was Rob Andrew. He was minded to intervene on that one. It's important to look, the DCMS letter, their site rather, does have reference to the individual decisions, the letters, as to whether they're minded to intervene. And you'll have to wade through an awful lot of ones saying, no, we're not bothered. But it's worth looking at the Lancashire one, because they were, at that case, prepared to intervene. DCMS, somebody has mentioned it, very poor. Yes, I would wonder whether we can get it through to the select committee that way, rather than the DCMS directly, but by making an approach to the select committee. Obviously, you have to know the MPs who are on the committee at any time, but if anyone's got a constituency MP on it, worth looking at. What else have we got? So, schools, not just the school libraries, but the relationship of libraries to schools has been, at the moment, every time it's been mentioned that the libraries, public libraries, provide a distinct service to schools and to education in general. The DCMS have said, oh yes, well, we know the European Convention on Human Rights mentions education. Yeah, but it doesn't say how many schools should be or how many schools should have easy access to the library. It doesn't say where there should be. Well, of course it doesn't, because it only provides general obligations. It's worth looking at it in detail, trying to get evidence from people in the school system as to how the libraries interrelate and how threatened closures would affect the educational system. Anything else on there? More consultation. Did somebody say there was? Yes. A report has been obtained. A damning report. That was in Essex, isn't it? A damning report has been obtained on consultation. Is that report? Could it be distributed or be provided to the library campaign? I know the general rule as to how you tackle a consultation, a poorly done consultation, but it would be nice to see somebody else's view if it can be circulated.
Can I just interrupt to say that consultation was about the questions they asked more than the process of consultation, or not that was something that we were pleased with. Geoff, I'm a bit conscious that we need that somebody's been waiting to get in for a while. I think possibly to talk about the Wirral.
Yeah, I was trying to get in before Geoff's talking because I'm from the Wirral, and I think we actually succeeded in that consultation because of the great support we got from the local people. I mean, I don't know anything legal, but I do remember sitting in a room that was absolutely a huge room. I didn't think it would be a quarter full, but it was actually a standing room only. And I think getting the public behind you on the libraries is so important. And I think one of the big issues we have is we have these, we haven't had them, of course, for the last, say, 18 months because of the situation we're in. We get these questionnaires from the council who put the onus on the people by saying something like, say, for instance, £100,000, how do you want it spent on them? Do you want it spent on healthcare and young people or libraries? And of course, a lot of people will go for the healthcare, whereas really the money should be divided equally for all of these things, because as somebody said before, well-being and mental health issues and lots of other issues, the libraries are a very important part of that. So it starts making people think, and I think we've got to keep the public on our side about how important these libraries are for so many reasons. Thank you.
In that case, go back to the Wirral report. I mean, the consultation, sure you're right, sure it's nice for meetings, but go back to that report.
Yes, Wirral is so long ago, I can't remember what year it was, but it was a classic. It's the only time the DCMS actually intervened when a council was offering to close a lot of libraries. The Minister was Andy Burnham at the time, for those who are interested in that kind of thing, although Secretary of State. They had this whacking great report with QCs on both sides, an enormous hired hall in Southport, hundreds of people, days and days. And after a lot of work, it did come up with a brilliant report, which had the effect of updating our old friend, the 1964 Act, with particular reference to the legislation on, oh Lord, I forgot what you call it, equal, you know, I can't believe it, equalities, protected groups, that kind of thing. So she really updated the legislation. Everybody thought it was a really good report and that future policy should be based on that. So this was notified to Wirral Council in advance, as you have to do. And Wirral Council immediately overnight said, okay, we won't close those libraries then. And then unfortunately, the libraries minister, whose name was Margaret Hodge, then decided, okay, well, let's junk the whole thing. They're not going to close the library, so we don't need to do anything with this Wirral report. And the thing sank into obscurity. It was a great wasted chance to update the 1964 Act with more relevant legislation. So we're still stuck with the 1964 Act, the DCMS, which honestly almost never does anything. Okay, Lancashire will give it. That was years ago now, wasn't it? And judicial review, which is very limited in what it can do, but it can delay things at best, I think. The legal routes are not awfully attractive. We've had a dream of taking some kind of review against the DCMS for some years, actually. We talk about it from time to time, but the time isn't right yet. So I would like to hear from somebody who is not bare knuckle fighting in the streets to save their library service right now. I'd like to hear from somebody who has a perfectly decent library service so far, might even have been recently rescued, and is working with that library service, hopefully with the happy compliance of the library staff, just to get the library better used, better publicised, more activities, more events, more finding out what people want. Is there anybody out there who isn't actually fighting tooth and nail, but is working fairly amicably with their local library to improve things?
Hazel's got her hand up. You can find the unmute button.
I think I have. Can
You have.
you hear me?
Yep.
I live in Sandwich in Kent, and I have already been through, as Laura will know, been through all this process in Dorset. so you have some experience of what can happen. In Kent, our libraries have already undergone a so-called consultation, which was a farce, but which nevertheless ended up in having the libraries divided into 3 groups. As a matter of fact, my town, Sandwich, is in the middle group. And I think we're in great danger that the lowest group of the smallest libraries, which have really been more or less closed entirely during the pandemic, will probably remain that way. There have already been whispers that the councillors are saying that they have to save money and that libraries, and as usual, soft targets are likely to be victims of the cuts that they're going to be making. So I think we're going to have another fight on our hands. It was extremely difficult to get anyone really interested in supporting anyone to cohere, to fight against the cuts that they have already made by reducing the opening hours. And I'm just very cynical about the whole thing, because once the council has made up its mind, unless you are prepared to take these enormous legal actions at great expense, it just seems to me that you don't stand a chance. You know, and it's whatever you say, whatever logic you have, and believe me, we brought up nearly all those arguments in Dorset. Nevertheless, one library was closed and 9 became volunteer run. It's not satisfactory at all, and I just see that most of the country is going to go down that path. And really, all the things that you have said are terrific. But unless there is a really big groundswell of a much, much bigger movement, I don't think anyone will stand much of a chance. Thank you. Cynical, I know.
Thank you. Well, we honestly, we are in that territory.
Yeah.
Councils, even the reasonably efficient councils, are facing monstrous cuts now. We're in stupid territory when they're doing things they know to be stupid to save money. But all the same, I think I've always thought it's amazing how little councils understand what libraries do for them. I do think massive public support, moral shaming, somebody said, might still have some effect, particularly if councils realised what libraries do for them, how much money they save, social services, education, crime prevention, health and well-being, public health, all these departments and more. If that point could be made, and I'm amazed that point is not better made already, but what ideas do people have about actually getting through to councillors what their libraries do? Because it is incredibly difficult. Any bright ideas?
I found the Irish Take a Closer Look campaign, where they relaunched their national services of libraries, quite an effective and arresting short video. I believe that was part of their campaign to bring all libraries in Ireland under one branding. So they did something called Take a Closer Look at sort of, I mean, it risks leaning into the community hubs narrative and sort of downplaying the books aspect, but it was very widely shared on social media. They were planning to play that in cinemas and things. So even having like a very short visual trailer almost of what, you know, library facts, what it is they can do, I think having it in video form really helped it reach a lot of people on social media, whereas a lot of sort of written up fact sheets of statistics aren't always as appealing.
Liz has got her hand up.
I was just thinking, pointing to the financial value of libraries is really good. I mean, I can't remember the statistics, but there are some research proved that a massive amount of money was saved on well-being, etc., through having libraries. If we can point to the fact that they'd actually be saving money by having proper library service and throw those figures at councils, I think that might make them think twice if we can actually talk in terms of cash. And there is information out there, but that's one of the things where I think we really need to look for the cash value of libraries.
Thank you. If anybody wants to know more about that particular piece of research, you go, oh, I knew it would come out backwards. Right, if you go to our website and look for the back issues of our magazine, it's in issue number 100, page 6. It's the piece of research done by Suffolk Libraries. They got some real bean counters to do an achingly detailed report. All they looked at, in fact, was 3 activity groups run by the libraries. They didn't look at the books or the computers or anything. They just looked at one group for kind of mothers and toddlers, one group for older people, and one group that was the general drop-in for anybody. And they just looked at the benefits of those 3 groups on the people who used them. And they costed in everything from pension cover for the staff time to the tea and biscuits, every possible cost they put in. And then they looked at the benefits, which varied from improved literacy in the small children to the older people being more alert, more with it, making fewer mistakes with their medication, going to the GP less. They could find a whole load of factors like that just from those 3 activities. And they figured out that for every £1 that had been spent on those 3 things, the saving had been, whoa, I think it's £8 and 4 pence or something. It's a smashing piece of research. One of the drawbacks is, of course, that the savings did not all accrue to the council. They accrued to the NHS, and they accrued to the schools are the council, of course, but that's a really key piece of research, and you can look it up on our website. The wider point, I've forgotten what the wider point was. Oh yes, Isadore's idea. Well, what he's saying is we need a national campaign just telling people about libraries. We've been saying this for decades and there is no sign of it. We started contacting Libraries Connected and Philip and people like that about last August, saying, surely you're going to do something, because it's going to be a very, very grim budget year. How can we help you? But it emerged they weren't actually going to do something. So what we're saying is somebody needs to launch a massive campaign. Can we do it ourselves at all? Possibly. Because nobody else is.
Just while people are pondering that, I'll throw in something. Barbara wants to come back in. Before she does, I'll just mention that in terms of how do we get politicians' attention, for those of us in shire counties and some unitaries and various other places, there are local elections on May the 6th. And you have your opportunity to question at least some of the candidates, if not all of them. In Essex, we are having a library hustings, and the bloke who is tipped to be the new Conservative leader of the council, because the previous one is not standing again, has agreed to come. So we are looking forward to that with some trepidation, I suspect. Barbara.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I was really interested when you were talking about the cash value, because sometimes when research has been given out, it's quoted things like it costs, say, £6.50 for each book that's lent out, and people say, oh, that means libraries really aren't worth the money. But if we can get the cash value and do the balance, the counterbalance, I think that would be a really, really good argument, just for the people on the street, really, as well, not just the council. That's all.
Yeah, actually quite a bit of research has been done on that, but it tends to be terribly complicated and boring. That's why I was so pleased to see this piece of work by Suffolk. But we will go back to our website, into which we try to put all the information that is useful, and see what we can rustle up more on that financial stuff. I know there's been some good work on how much money libraries save the NHS. That's quite a respectable piece of research. But then again, you have to make the point that council isn't going to save any money if it helps the NHS. But there is some work, but it tends to be awfully complicated. We will find it and put it on the website. Thank you.
I think just before Geoff's got his hand up, before he comes in, I think the British Library did some work on the economic value of libraries as well, but a few years ago we'd have to go digging for that. Geof?
Yeah. Actually, my home library service, Bolton, did produce a report several years back on added value. And there's an awful lot of research in at US universities. The figures tend to vary wildly. But Bolton got a professional report. I can remember referring to it in the submission I did when Bolton engaged in its last closures. I could probably dig it out somewhere in the garage where it's been hidden away. But the next thing I'd say is interesting. When it brings to mind the fact that Bolton had a number of closures, it took the library service down to, I think, at the edge of statutory viability. If your library service has had closures and I think there were some in the Isle of Wight, there were a few others, they will often have brought it down to close to breach of the statutory duty. Further cuts may well take it over the line. It's worth looking at those ones, particularly where there have been earlier closures. Now, I know I've not been popular with Laura on the Bolton one, but my own feeling was, though I did I think it was with exhibits around about 200 pages. I nevertheless would say that I probably, on that case, the DCMS were right not to intervene.
Oh,
thanks, Geof. I've got Isadore.
Yeah.
Hi, yes, I just mentioned in the chat, but just to elaborate on it, in terms of getting those research and those figures on things like the economic benefit, I think it would be useful to talk to library schools. I recently graduated from City's library school, and we brought in Alan Wiley to do a talk to the City students, and that was extremely popular and well received. And they are dominated by people who are going to become academic librarians and health librarians and legal librarians, and not so much public librarians, but actually a lot of them therefore are especially interested in learning more about public libraries. There may be several people in there who might have expertise on where to pull out the research, who might be willing to communicate that to you or share things that might otherwise be behind a paywall. Might be large bodies of students who are quite ready to be invigorated in public library campaigning. And I think, unfortunately, when that divide exists, you do have this issue that maybe academic librarians who then also may dominate things in, for example, CILIP, just don't really get a full picture of what's going on or what it's like to try and run a public library. And they also, at places like City and UCL, you have to do a dissertation for the full masters. So students are looking for research projects. And we certainly did management modules in which we learned about how to evaluate public libraries, and people might be looking to do something like that for a dissertation. So I think it would be useful to sort of build on that relationship.
Thanks, Isadore. Dick, T is, I'm not sure if you're just applauding or you wanted to get in.
Oh. Okay, no, I hope to speak, Andrew.
Go for it.
Just a thought. Right, we could campaign nationally for something like the third world 0.7% of GDP. I don't know what the figure is. I don't know whether somebody could work it out, but whatever, 0.1% or something, or 0.01% of the GDP should be spent on public libraries. How about that for a handle for a campaign?
Okay, throw that one into the pot as well. Although, given what this government's done on foreign aid and percentages, I wouldn't be too.
Well, while I've got the floor, Andrew, can I just say, divide the problem up into three things: saving books, which is my first priority; saving buildings, i.e. the libraries; and saving the staff. Now, I know TLC is union-backed and cares very much about all libraries being proper libraries with librarians, but if things got really desperate, I personally would save the things in the order I just dictated. Books first. Perhaps libraries could be run more automatically with all this high techniques and tech we have these days. And the librarians do a wonderful job, I find, at the moment, not being in libraries. They're back at their headquarters, and some of them, Suffolk for instance, is excellent at ordering books at the punters and reserving books. Regrettably, Lambeth can't seem to do that. Thank you.
Okay. I think it was slightly difficult to hear all of that. You were a bit blurred, but I think at one point you were suggesting that the union support for the three prongs of your, save libraries, save books, save buildings, save staff, was only two of those. And I think actually, speaking as an ex-Unison activist or a current Unison activist, it would be all three, because there's not much point in having the first two without the last one. But that's just me. Anybody else, particularly anybody who hasn't spoken? If you want to, Richard Fawcett has got a hand up.
Yes, thank you. Listening to the comments and the conversation, I feel very fortunate actually to be in Suffolk and the chair of one of the friends groups of the library in a very expanding village, currently expanding, liable to double its size in 5 years. Suffolk set up an independent organisation, which is sort of arm's length from the council, the Industrial and Providence Society, called Suffolk Libraries, to run their service, to which they get a grant, but also a great deal of fundraising takes place by that body and by people like ourselves in the friends groups, for ourselves and also for Suffolk Libraries. And there's one or two things I put in as being not involved in a campaign, but all this did start from proposals to close the majority of libraries some 10 years ago now. What we've been doing is running a lot of activities in the library. If I give you some idea, we were planning before the coronavirus struck to run a one-man theatre performance, wine tasting. As we've had a film project with young people, which has been a great success, a summer meal, a medieval green man talk, a village quiz with the local church, a trip to London with the Elmswell group. I mean, it's a big event, a trip to London, you understand, from Suffolk. We were involved with a lot of other activities with other groups. For example, a singing group held a concert in one of our halls in our village, along with the trustees of that hall. A Christmas tree festival with the parish church again, and so on. And we've been doing that sort of thing for a large number of years. Another background to that is not just raising money, but actually getting a lot of community identity with the library. And it not just being a place to go and borrow books or all the other very many services that our libraries offer, but it has a big community role. And along with that, we've also, in our library, been running a lot of groups. So we've had groups that have met in the library, which have varied over the years, but currently we have a Minecraft group, a sewing group, a manga club run by a young lady who's just gone off to university, and I'm not quite sure how that's going to carry on. An ancestry group, a choir, a geocaching group, a Lego club and a watercolour group, and a group who've met in the summer of a bike maintenance team. And what's this done is brought a lot of people into the library to take part in those activities. And you can also talk to people about what's going on. So it's become a very integral part of the village life. And at the moment, with the village, a lot of building going on, village, as I said, doubling in size. So we'll go from something like 2,700 households, double that plus in the 5 years. We're doing a lot of work now, setting up, particularly with the parish council, to look at how we can welcome newcomers in. And I think one of the things which has been important in Suffolk is this identity of the friends groups, which through the library have promoted the services the library offers, but also have involved the community strongly in all these different ways, to the point at which I think across the county, they are acknowledged to be much more than something of a building to go to or go to the website to actually facilitate the services, but they have a much wider community role.
Thank you for that. I think it's interesting to hear what is going on in Suffolk, because some of us have had and have misgivings about the Industrial and Providence Society. Things are happening there, as you've just outlined. I'm looking around for other hands. We've got about 10 minutes on our scheduled time. Anybody want? Elizabeth?
Is it okay? I just wanted to come back on the point about staff. And I think it is a misconception that a lot of people hold, that the librarians and the library workers are just there as part of the mechanism of the library to shelve books, to take them back in, to stamp them and send them out. It's far wider than that. And Lauren Smith, who was involved, a National Library campaigner who was involved with Voices for the Library, which Alan Wiley was also involved in, produced a brilliant list, which she sort of crowdsourced, of all the things a librarian does and library workers do in libraries. It's far wider. And she very kindly allowed us to use that as a basis of a list on our website, the Save Croydon Libraries website. I just don't think, it's very easy to think that it's not integral part of the role, but having, some years ago, I was a trustee of the library campaign and helped man the information line, and the number of issues people had with volunteer libraries where staff were not overseeing what was going on in the library would just make you weep, really. It's an absolute kettle of worms, so can of worms, thanks.
Oh, kettle of worms is much better.
Tired.
Anybody?
Well, I still want to know how we can run a big national library campaign, just us. I'm really attracted to the idea, and social media makes some things possible that were never possible before. Could we possibly do something like that? Apparently not.
Yes, but put it mildly, the shit is going to hit the fan soon. And yes, we will have our opportunity to talk about it. Yep.
Well, the first is certainly true. The second, we have to make sure about, and that's the tricky thing. It's quite hard to get people interested in libraries. Maybe when you're trying to close them all down and you can have pictures of crying children outside and stuff like that. But before it gets to that stage, it's very difficult to make people interested in libraries. Everybody seems to think they know what a library is because they went to one when they were 8 years old. They have no idea what libraries do now. I think Richard's work in Suffolk is brilliant in getting relationships with all the other groups within the village. I think that's a wonderful way to work, and should there be any danger in the future, and that's the model you want to be running to. Suffolk has made, despite our misgivings, as Andrew said, so far so very good with Suffolk. It's making use of their local people and doing some very good research and stuff like that. At the moment, the council gets it, don't they? They really say they understand what libraries do for health and well-being, etc. So it's working. I'm just thinking that every council is going to have to make massive budget cuts sooner or later. So I fear for Suffolk, however good it might be, I guess it's going to get a smaller budget, and be interesting to see how things work out then. Bad things are coming. We know that. We've just scratched the surface today, I think, of things we might think of doing. We've aired a lot of problems. We've examined a few solutions. We'll go back and look at our notes. We've got some information that people want to put on our website. I think we need to make the website a bit more explicit in making clear what it's got already, because there is stuff there that people say they want and it's there already. So we need to do some more work on the website. We need to make more room for it for other stuff. And we'd really like this to be just beginning, and to get your further thoughts and your bright ideas and your criticisms and comments emailed into us, please. We'd better put that into the chat.
I just did.
Oh, thank you. And there are some more ideas in the chat, what I haven't even had time to look at yet.
I've just calculated what we should do if we take up my idea of some fraction of the GDP being our campaign slogan. It's about 0.15% of government spending. That's what we spend on libraries. So if we say sort of charity begins at home, spend, well, it would be 0.075% of GDP, of course, even less. We might get somewhere. It's a simple slogan.
I think that could be a very good line. The point is, how do we get together to actually push it? That's what we need to know.
Well, it's been suggested in the chat that we might set up a working group. I mean, if those, I've already put into the chat that if you're not a member of the campaign and you didn't email us to say you were coming tonight, it'd be really helpful if you would email us later, or put it in the chat so that we could keep in touch. And it's been suggested that we might come up with some kind of working group. I think the catch will not be coming up with a working group, it's how you implement what they might think of. And if you know people, for instance, if you know people who are video makers who might be prepared to do it for nothing or for very little, because the first catch is, first thing for a campaign like that, and that might not be the only thing, is you've actually got to do it and you've got to fund doing it, and then you work out how you've got to work out how you put it out and try and get the money together for that. But we have been talking about how do we promote libraries just as much as saving them, and if we can get a decent video, for instance, along those lines, we might get more traction with people who won't talk to us if we're always complaining. But so, as I say, if you're interested, then email us outside the meeting, for want of a better phrase. We are close to 9 o'clock, which is when we had planned to close down, if only because some of us would like a life. But is there anything that anybody wants to say by way of, yes, Liz. You're on mute, Liz.